This morning I was with the Minister for Arts celebrating the launch of the DreamBig Festival. It's a wonderful children's festival. Next one will be recognising its 50th year. I recall as a child myself going along to a come-out festival and appreciating what it opened my eyes to in the sense of the role of the arts in South Australia, performance and music education in particular. This is a tremendously important body of work, and it's an important portfolio within government. It's a portfolio that I fear has been completely underdone and maligned under this new Labor government. I've heard members of the Labor Party speak in this chamber about the Malinowskis Labor government's support for the arts. Some talk about extra funding that has gone to the Fringe Festival. I've heard mention of the small grant, the modest grant that was provided to the Film Festival to enable it to annualise. I've heard some members talk about live music grants. These were election commitments. They were supposed to be delivered on, and they've been delivered on, so that's fine. What I never heard Peter Malinowskis say ahead of the election was that those arts commitments would be funded by radically reducing funding to all of the other arts community organisations and institutions across South Australia. Some of those cuts to arts institutions in South Australia are now seeing dramatic effects. I've raised in this parliament on a number of occasions the significant cuts to the South Australian Museum that have been instituted by this government. Now, whenever this has been raised in the media, the Minister for the Arts says, oh, well, our cuts coming in aren't as big as, the former government's cuts were when they came in. Now, I've had a look at the figures she's used. She talks about a 5% figure. The only way that arts administrators have told me you can get to that figure is if you include the cuts that were put in place by the member for West Torrens when he was the Treasurer in the mid-year budget review in 2017 that we inherited on coming to government in 2018. And they, imposed by the Labor Party, were dramatic and significant. And then there were modest efficiencies applied by the former government, but indeed also tremendous new resources applied by the former government. The arts plan that was delivered, as promised, the first arts plan for South Australia since the early 1990s. The investments in infrastructure, including the storage facility of $80 million, the scope for which I understand this new government is reducing. The investment of $200 million in Takari, the Aboriginal Arts and Culture Centre, which this government has put on pause. And from the way the Premier is talking like a real estate agent whenever he gets his eyes on that land at the parklands, I don't hold great hopes that Labor isn't planning on returning to its former policy of building apartments on those parklands. But at any rate, I come back to the museum. The cuts at the museum, the dramatic effect of them has now been exposed by FOI board minutes, which have shown that the museum board is talking about, they were talking about a deficit of $1.1 million. They've managed to reduce that deficit by applying some internal efficiencies, things like reducing the investment in research that the museum is undertaking. I heard the Deputy Premier talking about the Ediacara, the extraordinary research that led to the national park around Ediacara yesterday. Those Ediacara fossils, that work was in collaboration with research scientists at the South Australian Museum, a body of work that would not happen in the future as a result of these cuts that this government has imposed on the museum itself. They're turning off the ultra freezers, which have some collections that have been among the most heavily used, I'm informed, over the last 50 years. The cuts at the museum are seeing reductions, as I understand it, in security staff, and the way in which the museum is going to operate in the years ahead will be significantly challenged by this. As I understand it, there's still a deficit of more than $500,000, and the museum is expected to reach into their reserves to be able to pay that. There's no analysis or strategy being applied to these cuts. Cuts that are also, in its 50th year, affecting the Adelaide Festival Centre. As I understand, over $1 million in cuts to the Festival Centre. We were there this morning celebrating the DreamBig Festival, and that's great. They've got a good operation there, and they're able to still do a lot. But in its 50th year, you'd think that this government would be interested in supporting that Festival Centre with more than the cuts that they've applied. Most of the arts bodies, significant arts bodies, are facing challenging times. Prices are going up, no help from this government. Cuts have been applied, no strategy, just a blunt instrument. So, yes, it's good they're meeting their election commitments. I just wish they had more than an ounce of interest in the rest of the arts firmament in South Australia.